very concerned about the price of the hydrogen. About a year ago, it violently changed. It's effectively doubled. We have to be more cost conscious about the technologies we're putting forward. I mean, if we're putting forward a technology that's 3x the price, that's not much of a technology.
New car sales and how that's affected by the current interest rate policy.
Absolutely.
And it's negative. Used cars stay on the road longer, as you just
we're
stated
seeing
a few
that.
minutes ago.
Absolutely. Palladium and rhodium both, though there's more drop to come.
More downside.
More downside than up.
We're in such a huge surplus.
AI-based data centers are consuming some 10x power consumption than what a conventional data center. Effectively, all the transmission cables that you have in the world today on all the grids virtually need to double. A lot of metal is involved in fabricating what will be 4 subsea cables just to carry 3.6 gigawatts of direct current at any point in time. It's strange when you look at the periodic table, there's really only 2 losers on it I could see in this clean energy transition. One is palladium and one is...
Well, today we have a special guest in studio. We have Mr. Matt Watson. Matt, hello, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
Living the dream, baby.
Living the dream. I love it. So you fared the atmospheric river rain, I see it, to come visit us in California?
I swam upstream. I don't know if that's to spawn and die right here or what, but yeah, I made it. It's quite the storms we've had. So.
Well, good. We're glad you made it. So welcome.
Yeah, I guess we're not used to that much moisture, are we, in California?
Not too much in California.
The LA cement river can take only so much.
That's right. That's good.
Well,
good.
last year we had the pleasure of sitting down with you, and one of the topics that we discussed was the macro trend, which is the electrification of everything.
Right.
So I thought I would bring that up at the start of this podcast and just see what your outlook is for 2024 on that.
And just as a refresher, so there's actually 2 macro trends. One is the electrification of everything, which is indeed occurring, and the other is just the renewables and clean energy topics,
right?
And the metals demand that those bring to bear. So on electrification, absolutely a hot topic. And it's surprising out of all these discussions, nobody's been asking me what are the critical metals that go into all the devices that we all use, the iPads and iPhones and whatnot. And it's amazing the amount of content. It's climbing very fast, right? E-waste is an interesting business to be in these days, right? There's more and more content per device without any question about it. It's amusing watching the semiconductor and the data spaces and these data warehouses in particular. I was part of the hard disk drive industry for some 17 years of my career, so I do have some authority on this. But today they consume about 1.5% to 2% of the global grid just to power data centers, basically buildings full of hard disk drives and SSDs that are maintaining all these data sets. We're stamping out data centers at a rate that's just alarming. And now they're doing these AI-based data centers. And lo and behold, there's a big discussion now that's evolving out of this. Those AI-based data centers are consuming some 10x the power consumption than what a conventional data center operates. When these AI systems are into learning mode, they just go off and they're accessing everything within the data center, building a knowledge base about whatever it's been tasked to do. And so it's just another example of where the electronics of the future is actually now an emissions risk and concern. And they're projecting this 1.5% to 2% use will grow to 6% very quickly by 2050 with the propagation of more and more of these AI-based data centers propping up. In terms of PGMs, again, from me being from the hard drive industry, a lot of platinum and ruthenium goes on the rotatable hard disk drives. Those are in decline, even though they're half or even a third of the cost of what an SSD drive is, one that's populated with just flash memory, very little precious metals content. Though those basically require less aircon, less support from an OpEx perspective downstream, and even though they're more expensive, they're now being favored. They're faster as well and can serve these AI environments more. Right. So we're seeing a shift away from rotatable memory. That's a bit of a concern for ruthenium and platinum, ruthenium in particular. But the consumption overall is just continuing to grow. Lots of gold, lots of silver into electronics, as you guys know, some platinum as well. Lots of rare earths find their way into electronics, cobalt, tantalum, tungsten, you name it, right? It's all in there. So fascinating to watch the semiconductor market as it just grows.
Right. Well, now with that being said, with all this new AI technology and that output, what is that going to do with the current power grid?
Well, the power grid demands, the key thing that's going to grow the need on the power grids is going to be the EVs, right? There's going to be a significant portion of the grid that's going to have to be devoted just to charging all these EVs that are being propagated.
Right.
As different parts of this clean energy transition get mapped out, the requirements become more clear. Well, finally, for the grid, some of the targets are being laid out more clearly now in the past couple of months. Effectively, all the transmission cables that you have in the world today on all the grids virtually need to double by 2050.
Double.
And so there's a lot of metal that goes along for the ride, right? A lot of carbon steel, aluminum, copper. The transformers of the future will be much more copper intense to accommodate some of these neighborhoods that are going to be filled with EVs. And so, yeah, it's scary, the outlook on just how much metal is going to have to go along for the ride. I've talked already about subsea cables as a market segment nobody thinks about. Not only, do you need more transmission, but you need more high-power transmission lines over longer distances. And in Europe in particular, they're talking about pretty significant spans of high-power transmission. For example, from Morocco all the way up to the UK,
that's a big distance.
2,000 plus miles.
Yeah.
A lot of metal is involved in fabricating what will be 4 subsea cables just to carry 3.6 gigawatts of direct current at any point in time from Morocco to the UK.
Rich, you brought up clean energy, and that kind of dovetails into my question along the lines of the hydrogen economy that's being touted all over the place. Mm-hmm. Matt, you've got an opinion about that, don't you? As far as, there's a couple of different segments of hydrogen in this topic here.
When you talk about hydrogen, people immediately gravitate to the discussion of fuel cell vehicles.
Right.
And that makes a lot of sense.
That's one. Mm-hmm.
In terms of metals consumptions and the PGMs, that would be the biggest consumer of platinum by far, depending on how far that goes.
Right. But not rhodium, not palladium,
just
not iridium, just platinum.
Platinum. And the other two are iridium and ruthenium when you get into the hydrogen generation.
Right.
For the
ammonia generation or ammonia cracking, ruthenium will be involved. And so when you look at that, first of all, I'm very concerned about the price of the hydrogen. In California, we have some 50 plus filling stations of hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those used to be stuck at about $16 a kilogram was the sales price, retail price for years, to the point that I stopped tracking it. About a year ago, it violently changed. It's effectively doubled. It's now over $32 a kilogram in California for what is deemed gray or dirty hydrogen. They want to get a green stream going. It'll get some credits and carbon credits, as well as a subsidy from the Biden IRA.
Mm-hmm.
Get $3 a kilogram benefit there. But the cost of the hydrogen is just ungodly. And it's not just the cost to produce it, but to transport it to the point of retail distribution is where the cost is really spent. And so I'm becoming increasingly pessimistic. Well, then you look about hydrogen, and it's talked about use in green, whether it be green hydrogen, green ammonia, green steel, green any one of these that are a hydrogen-based fuel source and feedstock for heavy industry.
Right.
There, it's just, again, ungodly. They're talking about cost on green steel being 2x the price of the steel. Not 10% higher, not 2% higher, 2x or 3x, even 3x.
Why?
Is that viable? Is that really going to compete with China and other sources? I really have a hard time believing this. And there's just too many inefficiencies in the use of the hydrogen. I give people the example.
Are you looking at this from a U.S. perspective or
global? Yeah, I think global.
I just don't see this as being a viable economic energy source. It's just going to be too expensive. And I think it's bearing it out already. And I think there's a lot of projects that are having trouble getting funding because as they try to get the financials and do all the due diligence, they're realizing, oh my God, this is a cost egg.
Yeah.
By the way, wind and solar is in that bucket these days. Wind is failing miserably. All the non-Chinese wind makers, and there's about 3 of them, they're all suffering badly right now and all crippled. There's projects that are being derailed and being pulled the plugs on. They're having to renegotiate the rights that they've already done this offtake agreements on. They need to raise it by 50% or 2x in some cases.
Well, you mentioned subsidies here in the United States. What are you seeing as far as subsidies go in Europe or in Asia?
Well, Europe is actually behaving much more recklessly financially than even the U.S. and even California, frankly. The Europeans have gone very, very crazy.
So like to the extreme?
To the extreme. So anyway, just to wrap up the hydrogen. So the hydrogen piece, I'm worried about it being cost viable. The second part of it that I get worried about from a metals perspective, and as a PGM guy, is just the abundance. How much are we going to have to play with in the hydrogen economy?
Right.
I would argue it's about 3.5 to 4 million troy ounces of platinum, ruthenium, and iridium are going to be available. That's nothing. We got 13 million troy ounces a year feeding automotive today and AutoCats.
Could you repeat that again? How many ounces?
3.5 million for the hydrogen economy versus 13 million for today's ICE support. It's a big difference.
That's significant.
And there's not going to be more platinum coming around the corner, or iridium, or ruthenium. In fact, if anything, the outlook is for depressed amounts of supply. So how big could the vehicle market go is a real limitation. I think you can only do about 9 million hydrogen fuel cell vehicles a year, if in your best case, if the price
with those available ounces.
Well, we heard this week that Sibanye was taking offline a few of their deeper shafts, high cost shafts, and
you'll see more of that.
My assumption is that those deeper mines are the ones that are producing the iridium.
So, and again, I go back, if you break down the periodic tables on what mines make what, South Africa, they make truly platinum group metals, where platinum is the dominant volume source.
Right.
As you get to Zimbabwe and Russia, North America, suddenly it's palladium group metals, where palladium is the dominant, some 2 to 1 to 4 to 1 more than even platinum, with virtually none of the minor PGMs involved, right? So there's a lot of these palladium projects that, as the palladium price is dropping and we see parity with platinum today, right?
Yeah, we're looking at it on the chart right here.
You know, so
they're equal in
and
price.
as I've been selling you, the palladium and rhodium both, though there's more drop to come.
More downside.
More downside than up.
We're in such a huge surplus of palladium,
Right. Why is that? And it goes back not so much to the EV penetration rates. That has to do with the vehicle sales globally. In 2017, pre-COVID, we did 93 million and change global light-duty vehicles. We have yet to touch that level again, including the EV portion.
Right.
Right now, the forecasts are at best 2026 will be that break-even year with 2017. That's a full decade of this lost volume.
Lost growth.
Right.
This lost volume. Right. And that's where these surpluses of palladium and rhodium have built up. And now the EV penetration rates will play a more critical role in eroding that even further. And even though I think my projection is right that the world will be filled with far more hybrids than people, I think, initially thought, which are still ICE vehicles as well, of course.
They take spark plugs,
They take
oxygen
spark plugs,
sensors, catalytic converters.
Catalytic converters, right? So all that will help benefit the PGMs. But I just don't think quick enough to impact the surpluses that are already starting to show, right?
Right.
And you're going to see further erosion.
Further downside to fall.
Yeah, I think you get further downside on rhodium and palladium,
Rhodium,
unfortunately,
palladium.
folks.
Yeah.
Right.
Platinum's holding its own.
Platinum's-
Long-term platinum should creep up and get pressured. I don't see a way around that. But
Fuel cells.
fuel cells, what portions of the hydrogen economy are going to go? And there's parts of Europe, including Germany, that are just, they're hell bent that they're going to do this, come hell or high water. They know the cost problems they're getting into, and yet they're going to build a whole infrastructure built around hydrogen. So we'll see how that works out. But their energy
Determined to
costs
do
are
that, huh?
their energy costs are just climbing like crazy. Heavy industry is fleeing Europe at just a breakneck pace. They're effectively
just fleeing,
pushing
huh?
smelters, ammonia production. Any heavy industry is just getting displaced out of Europe.
That's
it's
tough.
Really an ugly environment, regulatory-wise, to operate in. So you guys complain about how bad California is from a regulatory perspective. The noise is even louder from Europe than it is from California, and you guys are fairly loud. So.
Yeah. What about in recent news? Hertz Rental Car, one of the biggest rental car companies out there.
So
They just depleted a third of their fleet, which is 20,000 EVs.
So the EV hype is just that. It's the biggest hype job ever. And the realities of the EV transition are the legacy automakers, the Fords, the GMs, the VWs. They're losing about $30,000+ per vehicle still on EVs.
Still.
They have the benefit of often somewhere in the neighborhood of $7,500, national subsidy to help offset the cost. Still not enough.
Not enough.
They told us that at about $100 per kilowatt hour from the battery space, that would be parity with gasoline. That's not true. I think for the EV space to truly succeed, they need a full R&D turn. They need another generation in battery development.
Yeah.
One of the batteries I've talked about is the next generation lithium sulfur batteries.
Right.
That's the use of the platinum or palladium
Well,
cathodes.
there's one program called the Lion Battery Project that is playing with palladium and platinum layer on the cathode materials.
Right.
That plays a role with lithium sulfur. And they're achieving energy densities of about 400 kilowatts per kilogram of material. It's a gravimetric energy density measure. Well, that's much higher than today's 200, 220.
Right.
And by the time they would go mainstream with that, they think they'd be at 500. So that'd be a true doubling of the energy density.
That's pretty good.
Get away from nickel and cobalt completely.
Right.
You have lithium. Sulfur will be a tough topic in its own, but a much more cheaper set of materials drops your sustainability, your recycle proposition is going to be horrible on that, right? The battery space is moving to worse and worse recycle states. I feel bad for all the battery recyclers. There's sodium ion is starting to propagate. It's only 2% market share today, but it will grow. So they're looking for cheap metal and cheaper priced batteries, alternatives, right?
Right.
And so that's going to make the recycle proposition lower and lower over time, right?
That'll be a cost center.
And it's so dirty
that's
to
the sort
mine
of jump.
those
We need a lithium
minerals.
sulfur. Teslas need a full doubling of energy power and all those kilograms of battery metals. Then I think the profitability will get in a better range to be on par with fossil fuels. But frankly, it's just a little bit too soon. And
How far out is that? Is
and I
it
think the
still
discussion
maybe-
pushing for hybrids as an alternative to full range EVs is back on the table again. I think there are a lot of regulators that are starting to wake up to this in Europe and in the U.S. both. That I still think there's a hope for a much more expanded hybrid market. Of course, that's great. You don't have the charging infrastructure that is required.
Right.
It's a much more seamless transition,
Right.
and I think a better stepping stone en route to full-fledged 300-mile EVs.
Well, that's what discourages a lot of people from buying the EV. The range,
Well,
the
range
charging.
anxiety, the thing people don't talk about is the depreciation on an EV. Your first 5 years, you've effectively written off the car. And I still have questions about the scrap cadence on the vehicles themselves, the EVs themselves. As you know, ICE vehicles are lasting well beyond 20 years of age before they end up in the scrap
right now,
yards.
definitely. It's hurting the recycling sector because of that.
Absolutely. Everybody's hanging on to their old ICE, as I am. I have two, 20-year-old vehicles.
Sure.
I don't want to let them go.
Right.
I don't wanna
Drive
have
it till the
pay.
wheels fall off.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And lots of challenges on the recycle side, as you guys know, on the AutoCAD recovery side as well. But volumes have dropped precipitously, right? It's tough.
Yeah.
In a couple of weeks, we'll all be together again at the winter conference for the IPMI in Orlando.
That's right.
I understand that you will be presenting and I believe also moderating as well.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, I know you've got a message for the membership that you're going to be presenting different topics. If there was a couple of takeaways from that presentation, what is it that you would like the attendees to come away with?
We have to be more cost conscious about the technologies we're putting forward. If we're putting forward a technology that's 3x the price, that's not much of a technology.
Okay.
There are clean energy transition topics involving metals that have been fantastic for us. LED is a good one that comes to mind. LED lighting. It sells itself on its own behalf. It's 5x brighter, uses a third of the energy. Okay, stop right there.
That's pretty good.
That's a pretty good turn, right?
Yeah.
It sells itself. And so LED propagation in businesses has grown and will continue to grow over the next decade. It's a great energy efficiency play, and it uses metals strategically to accomplish that. Fantastic. We need to be looking at the cost of these technologies a little bit more sensibly about what we're doing and be more vocal about this. I looked at this latest wave with the EV transition. The legacy OEM guys just rolled over. Oh, yeah, we'll do it. We'll transition. Without realizing they're cutting their own throats.
Big time.
And that's where we're at. The Chinese EV makers are so much lower cost than we are. And I go back to the responsible mining aspects of this. They will forever be cheaper than us.
Right, of course.
I take the simple example of rare earth elements that are so important. Where hundreds of kilograms go into each windmill. The rare earths drive these EV motors. So essential to the transition, right? And yet when you look at the way they produce these rare earth, it's disgusting. You generate 2,000 tons of toxic materials for every 1 ton processed, a very acidic process. The Chinese literally just dump it out in a lake out back, an unlined lake that's 6 miles in diameter.
So there's no treatment
That's
cost.
a dead acid lake.
Right.
Next to a population center of 2.3 million people, right?
Only 2.3.
Do you think we'll ever have rare earth mining that can compete with that? No, that's the cheapest way to do it.
So it's a false, inexpensive method.
Right. Nickel mining in Indonesia. So they're taking their, this very caustic runoff-based nickel mine tailings. They fix that. They'll dump it in the oceans. right? And there's all sorts of problems with water leaching and downstream problems
Definitely.
ecologically.
Right.
They're throwing in coal smelters left and right to power these things. I just chuckle. Are we really saving the environment with all this? No.
So I want to.
And if we got to go double all the wiring and then the grid as well as part of this EV
Right.
package,
Right.
what's the true cost in EV emissions? It's at best on par
Okay, I want to throw a
with fossil fuels.
curveball at you.
It's not a big benefit.
My curveball for
We're
you is
completely out of our mind on
we
why
try
we're
to
doing
stay
these
away
things.
from the political narrative, okay? and we know that we are on the outskirts of discussing some of the politics that drive a lot of these policies that enter the industries that we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
But that aside, and I know this is not a big thing for you, but I want to ask you anyway, because you have an opinion on this. All right. What is your opinion about where we're going to be, say, 12 months out on the interest rate cycle?
Oh my gosh, good question. Well, I think there's more pain that's being shed from China. This Chinese economic problems seem to be cascading and expanding in scope, right? They have lots of trillions and trillions more of unfunded liabilities yet to be reckoned with. And so watching how that spins and then watching how Europe responds in the next year, as hot as the U.S. economy is, we'd be even hotter if it wasn't for them pulling us down, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And so there's more potential pain out there.
So look at it as
I think the interest rates,
as
it's not guaranteed we're going to see this
as a North
quantitative
American
easing.
issue, okay? As a North American issue, do we see interest rates continuing at these relatively high rates, or do you think they're going to come off?
I think it'll continue longer than people realize. I don't think the Fed's going to necessarily back off as quickly as people think. I just think the data is going to warrant. There's lots of concerns about, more and more large organizations are stacking up pink slips for people, and we're seeing some reductions in headcount. We're seeing it in California, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Europe substantially.
Right.
And so, again, I think there's more economic, settling in, if you will, and adjusting yet to occur. So,
Well, the reason I
To
asked
that
that
point-
question is because I want to get to the underlying questions. I think interest rate policy drives a lot of what's occurring in our industry. When I say our industry, Noble 6, catalytic converter recycling industry. I think what we are looking at is what's going on with new car sales and how that's affected by the current interest rate policy.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's negative. It's
And home sales as well, yeah, of course.
the sales are not there.
Right.
And if the sales are not there, that means the trickle-down effect, in our opinion, is that used cars stay on the road longer, as you just
We're
stated
seeing
a few
that.
minutes ago.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're seeing it.
We're seeing 20 years on the road for
Sure.
older cars. We used to see 11 to 13 years. They would enter the recycle market. And so I guess our view is that this higher interest rate policy is negative for our industry.
Absolutely.
As far as volume and numbers of catalytic converters that come out of legitimate sources for recycling,
Right.
that affects it negatively.
And I'm sorry, it's going to be another painful year. That's the answer.
Yeah.
It's going to be another painful year.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say that. We've been saying that internally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to hear it from the outside of this office.
Yeah.
It's going to be another painful year. Your
Another
prices
painful
are,
year.
You're going to see the palladium and
Probably going to
rhodium
drop from
further.
what we see
Another
today. Right?
$200 off on palladium.
I love. By the way, I love just touring your iridium spark plug recycle process that you've got going. It's
Yeah.
legit, people. It's happening in volume. We need feedstock, so please collect your spark plugs. There's a viable business path here through Noble 6 to get those spark plugs, get the iridium back into the system. By the way, a number of my clients want to know, how do I find iridium scrap? How do I help support this recycle loop?
Yeah.
A lot of discussions about mixed metal oxides that go into
Anodes.
coatings on anodes that go into a whole range of industries,
Right.
electrowinning,
Right.
refractories, anywhere there's crystal growth, there tends to be iridium involved one way or another.
That's right.
good.
That's right.
So lots of people chasing that iridium, trying to help support the future hydrogen economy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the
electrolyzers.
iridium is going to end up
Yep.
is in supporting that anode manufacturing.
And the kilograms of iridium catalyst materials, that is truly starting to happen, right? We're seeing really much more significant shipments. So that's part of why we see iridium still stuck at some $5,000. there's demand out there coming, and more down the road. So iridium could be under some pressure, for sure. So stay
Yeah,
with the
supply
recycle.
side,
That's a good one. So
Yeah, on the supply side.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, and so, I didn't want to hear that from you, Matt, that we have another year's worth
Well,
of
yeah, we've been
of,
saying that internally.
negative
because
growth.
what affects new car sales? It's affordability.
Right.
If someone comes in with an 800 plus FICO score and they're putting a good chunk down, interest rates where they're at, I mean, it's double the payment that what they're paying now.
I mean, $800,000 to $1,000 a month for your vehicle.
Right.
It's just
That's the norm.
Yeah, that's the norm now.
And that affects because the OEMs, right? We were discussing this earlier off camera, but if they don't have an appetite when they're building the new cars, right?
Yeah.
Where's the appetite for the white metals, right? Our PGMs that affect our sector.
Out of all the periodical table, the PGMs are the original clean energy transition metal. And it's strange when you look at the periodic table, there's really only two losers on it I could see in this clean energy transition. And one is palladium and one is rhodium. And yeah, those are really getting pummeled and will continue to. The IPMI, and I know the Russians, Norilsk, had the palladium challenge. We're looking for the next uses of palladium and the next uses of rhodium.
Good. I was going to ask you about that.
We're
Is
trying
there
to
an
coach
update?
people up that's coming in. So, so one of the projects is this Lion battery project. We're going to get an update on that in just a couple of weeks. So
good.
You'll hear
You'll
firsthand
talk
from
about
that.
it?
Yep. We've got a
very good.
presentation on that. We've got your progress with the iridium recycle. Thank you there. That's good to see. Like I said, kilograms of material are flowing now, and I think Furia is doing quite well in all this, as you can imagine.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We've had some serious interest from some OEMs. They've reached out to us on supplying feedstock.
good.
And, we just took delivery of a second improved version of the robotic harvesting system.
Right.
And so now we're in trials and setup and should be online here a week or so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Fantastic.
Yeah. Wonderful. I really appreciate you coming down today, Matt.
Not a problem. My pleasure.
Yeah. You found yourself in Southern California when it wasn't sunny Southern California.
You survived.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.